The interstellar spaceship Avalon drifts through deep space, headed toward a distant colony called Homestead 2. Every cabin is empty and the vessel runs entirely on autopilot. All 258 crew members and 5,000 passengers are deep in hibernation. Suddenly the ship passes through an asteroid belt, and the impacts begin weakening its shields. Power is diverted to the main shield, but the ship is now on a collision course with a giant asteroid. The asteroid slams into the ship, triggering a cascade of malfunctions. The ship begins repairing itself, but one hibernation pod suddenly activates. The passenger inside is Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. His pod opens and an automated system walks him through the process, informing him he spent 120 years in suspended animation and that the ship is now just 4 months from Homestead 2. He is told he can spend those 4 months enjoying all the luxurious amenities the ship has to offer. Jim receives instructions about his ID band, his cabin, and the activities he is expected to take part in before the ship arrives at the planet. Excited and nervous to meet people, he gets ready, leaves his cabin, and walks into an automated class designed for an entire learning group. Jim looks uneasy as the hologram describes Earth as overpopulated, overpriced and generally overrated. It tells him to hold his questions until the end, but Jim keeps asking why he is the only one in the room. He realizes the hologram cannot answer him and goes looking for other people. He makes his way to the ship's main concourse. No one is here either, but an automated information desk offers to help. Jim asks to speak to a real person, gets directed to a steward, finds no one, and then asks for the captain. When he reaches the bridge, he cannot get inside, but through the glass he can see that none of the crew is there either. Jim heads to the observatory and discovers the ship is still 90 years away from Homestead 2. Realizing he woke up far too early, he races back to the concourse and fires off a message to Earth, desperate to know how to get back into hibernation. The communication system tells him the message will take about 55 years to receive a reply. Jim is devastated. He wanders the ship and finds the bar, where he spots another person. As he chats with the bartender, something about the man seems strangely off. When the bartender reaches for a drink, Jim realizes he is an android. His name is Arthur. Jim tries to get information out of Arthur, but he cannot even explain to the android why he is awake so far ahead of schedule. The next morning Jim goes to the cantina, where he quickly discovers that nearly everything on the menu is reserved for gold-class passengers. He settles for a plain coffee and tries to figure out how to repair his hibernation chamber. After gathering the right tools, he gets the pod running and climbs inside. But nothing happens. He then tries using his tools to break into the crew's hibernation chambers. That doesn't work either. Minor malfunctions keep cropping up around the ship. Jim keeps returning to the bar to drink, but mostly to talk to Arthur. Arthur gives him some advice that convinces Jim to break into a gold-class suite and try having some fun. Jim tries every restaurant, game and entertainment system on board. But as time passes, he only grows more miserable being completely alone. One day he gets drunk, wanders through the pod bay, and stumbles upon an airlock stocked with spacewalk suits. Jim puts on a suit, steps into the airlock, pushes a lever, and hits the button to release the door. Once outside the ship, he is completely mesmerized by the view. He is the only conscious human alive to experience that moment. Jim cuts the magnets on his boots and floats freely in space, overcome with despair. He comes back inside, takes off the suit, but returns to the airlock without it on. He pulls the lever and opens the airlock door. He is ready to end everything, but at the very last second he changes his mind, bolts back inside, and slips on a bottle. Jim picks himself up and is instantly drawn to a woman sleeping in one of the nearby pods named Aurora. He looks up her files on the directory and listens to her passenger interview, quickly becoming captivated by her. Later he is found sitting beside her pod, still listening to her recordings. Back at the bar, he reads her published writing and talks to Arthur about what she has written. He becomes fixated on the cruel irony of his situation, leaving Earth for a better life and finding himself with nothing. He will never reach his destination, and the perfect woman he has found is completely out of reach. Jim cannot stop thinking about her and starts hitting the idea to wake her up too. He talks it over with the android, but Arthur cannot grasp the moral weight of it. Waking her up for his own benefit would strand her on the ship with him, sentenced to die before reaching the colony. Jim decides against it at first, but as months drag on he cannot let the idea go. And one day he finally makes his choice. He walks to her pod and activates it. As she goes through the same awakening process he once did, Jim slips back to his cabin. A little while later he heads to the main concourse, hoping to find her. And there she is, just as confused and disoriented as he was a year ago. Jim tells her they are the only ones awake and takes her to the observatory. He explains that he has been unable to reach the crew or access any of the ship's main controls. Aurora panics and demands to get back into her hibernation pod. When they reach it, Jim explains there is no equipment on the ship that can put them back into hibernation. They are stranded. They head back to the concourse and Jim urges her to get some rest. He keeps insisting she needs rest after everything she has just been through. He reminds her she needs sleep since she just came out of hibernation. She feels sorry for him, knowing he has been alone on the ship for over a year. Jim goes back to the bar, feeling crushed by regret over what he has done. He asks Arthur to keep it secret that he was the one who woke her up. The next day, Aurora wakes up. She heads to the concourse and questions the automated info desk about the hibernation pods. Jim joins her there and they go to get breakfast. As they leave, the info desk sparks and malfunctions. In the cantina, she learns Jim has been eating the same meal every single day for over a year and gets him a gold-class menu. They discuss fixing the pods. But unlike Jim, Aurora is not ready to accept defeat. She searches the infirmary, digs through research documents, and ends up at the crew hibernation quarters trying to force the doors open. Jim notices more and more malfunctions throughout the ship. Sometime later, Aurora grows increasingly melancholy about her life on the Avalon. She writes, jogs the corridors, and swims in the pool, becoming more and more aware of this life she never asked for. She is called back to the ship and returns. She heads back aboard once more. She returns to the ship without protest. She goes to the cantina to interview Jim, thinking his story could be worth writing about. She asks what made him choose to emigrate to the colony. Jim starts with company slogans but then opens up, saying he wanted a new world where he could be somebody and build a real life. Later they end up in the observatory and Aurora finally shares her own reason for being on the ship. Unlike everyone else on board, she holds a round-trip ticket. Her plan was to go to Homestead 2, live there for a year, return to Earth, and become the first journalist ever to do it, writing the story of a lifetime. Aurora slowly gives up hope of fixing their situation, so Jim comes up with ways to lift her spirits. He takes her dancing, to the cinema, and to the basketball court. Lastly, he brings her to the bar to meet Arthur. She relaxes for a bit, until the reality of their situation pulls her back down. Jim is left alone with the android, feeling awful about what he has done to her. He is soon seen tinkering with something in secret, and later Aurora walks into the observatory to find a tiny model of the Chrysler building he built for her. Sometime later, they go on a date at the bar. They have dinner and share stories about their lives. She tells him her father died when she was a teenager. After dinner, Jim takes Aurora to the airlock, and they get into the spacesuits. They go out for a spacewalk together. Jim finally has someone to share that magnificent experience with. Jim cuts the magnets on their boots and the two of them float freely together in space. They come back inside, share a kiss, retreat to his cabin and sleep together. Soon after, they start living together. They start looking like a couple. Aurora moves into his cabin and writes about her life on the ship. They jog together, eat together, sleep together. Jim explores the ship further and finds the hydroponics bay. He brings Aurora flowers. One day the ship passes by a red giant, and they go to the observatory to see it. It is Aurora's birthday. So later that night they celebrate at one of the ship's restaurants and then the bar. Jim goes to the washroom to prepare the ring he made for Aurora, while she stays at the bar chatting with Arthur. Not realizing he was supposed to keep it secret, Arthur tells Aurora that Jim woke her up intentionally. Suddenly Jim returns, and she confronts him in absolute disbelief. She runs away, furious and panicked. Jim comes back to his cabin to find all her things gone. He runs into her in the cantina the next day, but the moment he speaks, she runs away. Aurora is desperate. One night she goes to his cabin, punching and kicking him, wanting to kill him. Since she keeps avoiding him, Jim tries to apologize over the comm and attempts to explain his actions to her. He tells her he fell in love with her, but Aurora doesn't care. She cannot forgive him for taking her life. One night, as Jim is in his cabin, another malfunction happens. The ship faces a critical error and the main command shuts down. Later he walks into the elevator and it malfunctions. Aurora walks into the main concourse and sees that Jim has planted a tree there. Then she goes to the cantina, where the food dispensary is also malfunctioning. Suddenly both of them hear what sounds like a voice from somewhere on the ship. They rush to the concourse and find Gus Mancuso, a deck chief, standing in front of Jim's tree. They introduce themselves and tell the chief about their situation. He doesn't understand how 3 hibernation pods could fail. Mancuso takes them to the bridge and discovers something is wrong with the ship, but the system data has to be checked manually. When they leave the bridge, a robot nearly falls on their heads, and Jim and Aurora tell Mancuso the malfunctions have been happening more and more frequently. He says that shouldn't happen, as he shows them how to fix the problem. Mancuso checks on the pods. And Jim joins him there. He has figured out what happened with Aurora's pod. The deck chief finds what Jim did to be terrible. Later he is at the bridge checking the collected data when Aurora joins him. They talk about what happened with her pod. But he tells her there is nothing he can do about it. Jim walks in with the 16th broken robot. Mancuso feels the hibernation sickness and goes to rest. But, as he walks out, he coughs up blood. That night, Aurora is restless and cannot settle down. Suddenly there is gravity loss throughout the ship and she starts drowning as the pool water moves with her. The gravity drive resets and she barely makes it out alive. They both run into each other on the way to find Mancuso. The three of them are back at the bridge, slowly piecing together what has been going on with the ship. Mancuso figures out that something happened 2 years ago, taking out a major system. They need to find and fix the cause of the failure, because the entire ship is straining to compensate. If they don't fix it, the entire vessel will be destroyed. They go to find the problem. But Mancuso faints. So Jim and Aurora rush him to the infirmary. He is dying and there are no treatments that can stop it or give him more time. Sometime later, the three of them meet in the observatory, and Mancuso gives Jim his ID bracelet, tells them to fix the ship, and immediately perishes. Suddenly the lights shift to an alarming red and the ship starts shaking. Jim tells Aurora he needs her help, and they run toward engineering. But there is another failure in the gravity drive. And immediately, the ship is shaking. As they open the hatch, Aurora gets sucked in. The asteroid has caused a breach in the hull in that area. Jim gets sucked in too. But he holds on to the hatch as it keeps closing on him. Eventually he is pulled fully in. But they quickly manage to seal the breach. The moment that problem is fixed, Jim realizes there is more than one breach in the hull. The two of them trace the meteor's path and find it struck the reactor control computer. Jim thinks he can find replacement parts for it. They find the part and swap it in. But the part is broken. Jim finds the part and changes it. But the part is broken again. The two of them are left alone in the wreckage. The process of venting the reactor still fails. They do it manually. But it fails again. Jim figures out he needs to open the vent door from outside the ship so they can cool the reactor down. Both of them go to the airlock and as he gets ready to head out, he gives Aurora Mancuso's bracelet in case he doesn't come back. She helps him with the suit. And as he walks into the airlock she tells him to come back, because she can't live on the ship without him. Aurora goes back to the reactor, where the temperature has hit critical heights. A bolt from the reactor strikes her in the arm. She cries out in pain but refuses to leave the reactor. She pushes through the pain and stays inside the scorching reactor room. Another surge from the reactor threatens to overwhelm her as the heat intensifies. The temperature rises in the reactor room while Jim works outside to bypass the vent door and open it. He soon realizes he will have to manually hold the door open so the reactor can vent, and he tells Aurora. She doesn't like the plan. But he goes ahead with it and tells her to vent the reactor. She doesn't want him to die and they argue. But he tells her they have to save the other people, and she vents the reactor. The process is successful, but the reactor fumes blast Jim away and break his tether. The pressure in his suit is dropping too. He tells Aurora what happened and she tells him to make his way back. Aurora desperately calls out to him. She puts on a suit and flies out to get him. But her tether is too short. She is pulled back, but suddenly grabs onto his tether and manages to pull him in. Aurora drags Jim into the infirmary, only to find out that he is already dead. She uses Mancuso's bracelet to override the medical protocols and resuscitate him. The medical pod does the work automatically and revives Jim. Aurora forgives him. Later, Aurora fixes Arthur and they give Mancuso a proper space burial. Jim shows her something he has discovered that could change everything for them. He tells her there may be a way to give one of them their life back. The medical pod, he explains, could put one person back into hibernation for the rest of the journey. He offers to let her be the one to return to sleep. He gives her the choice. She can go back to hibernation and live the life she always planned. But as is later revealed, she declines and decides to stay with him. Awake on the ship, Jim finally proposes to her, and they live out their lives on the ship. 88 years later, the Avalon arrives on Homestead 2. The crew wakes up and finds the ship in a very unexpected state. Aurora leaves them a message, retelling the story of the life she and Jim had on the ship while the rest were sleeping.